And right now, a couple of rather shocking headlines. These are both from The Guardian. One, the world's richest 0.1% have boosted their wealth by as much as the poorest half of the world's citizens. And the other, almost 100 million people a year forced to choose between food and health care. Meanwhile, this bizarre tax bill that is working its way through Congress or through the House Senate reconciliation process is pretty extraordinary. Let's check in with Professor Richard Wolff, an actual real economist, the co-founder of Democracy at Work. His most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His websites, democracyatwork.info and rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, as in Professor Wolff, P-R-O-F, W-O-L-F-F, or at democracy at W-R-K. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, your thoughts on these headlines, these articles from The Guardian. Inequality report shows the UK's richest 50,000 people have seen their shares of the country's wealth double since 1984. What is going on, and why is it worldwide when mostly the U.S. and the UK had Reagan and Thatcher? Did the whole world adopt Reaganomics?
Well, in a way, yes. And the reason is really pretty simple to see, that the people in the United States and Britain who stood to gain, as you yourself have pointed out, over the last 35 years, from rising productivity that they didn't have to share with the mass of the rest of the people in a rising ability for them to enjoy a higher standard of living, and they have to take it all themselves, and the United States then becomes the most unequal society in the world. One of the things that does is create an enormous incentive for the people who run the corporations in Europe and Asia and Africa and Latin America to want to emulate that, to try to undo the social welfare systems they have in their countries, to try to change the pattern in order to keep up, in a sense, with the Joneses here in the United States and in England. And so, yes, it has spread all over the world, depending on how much resistance the people in each country put up to that. The inequality, though, is the real key to this story, that we have now been living for an entire generation in an economic system that is unbelievably successful in making the rich richer and everybody else either poorer or stagnant in their situation. To substitute wages by putting everybody in a huge personal debt for your credit card, your home, your car, and now even in many parts of the world for your kids' education. This is if anything was an indictment of an economic system not working for the majority of the people, this inequality report by Thomas Piketty and his associates is the evidence, the smoking gun, whatever you want to call it, that this is a system that we ought to be debating and criticizing, rather than pretending that it is the normal that we all have to accept.
And yet the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress want to double down on trickle-down. You've got Stephen Moore out there quoting a relatively obscure speech that Jack Kennedy gave to the Economic Club of, I think it was New York, in '63. Kennedy at that point seems to have drunk the Kool-Aid. In 1960, in the debate, he said he wanted to close loopholes, to increase revenues, to spend more on education, more on housing. I've played that clip a million times. But they're doubling down on this. What will be the result of that?
Well, here's the thing that mystifies so many of us. And when I say us, I don't mean just one side of the political spectrum among economists. I talk to right-wing economists, center economists, left-wing economists, and I'm struck, as they are, by the following agreement amongst us. We do not agree on how we got into this mess, and we do not agree on how to get out of it. But we do agree that the conditions of the American economy are unspeakably bad, and they have gotten worse over the last 30 years, and this tax law will make, the rich richer and the rest of us poorer. Instead of reacting and correcting for what's been going on, it continues. It leaves you with the impression of a system so skewed to the rich that it's spinning out of control. It is folks who have already more than they know what to do with insisting on doing more, so they have even still more, in a kind of lunacy that makes you think of the Midas touch or other stories like that, when people literally destroy themselves because there's no counterbalancing in the society.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the centerpiece of this tax bill: to cut corporate profits from 35% as their official rate down to 20 to 22.
Corporate
That's
taxes.
an almost 50% cut in corporate taxes. At the end of a period of time when corporations are richer and more profitable than they've ever been, when they have gained more of the society's wealth over the last 30 years than at any comparable time in our history, why in the world would you do more of that?
Isn't this a classic example of overreach? I mean, they've got everything, and so they're grabbing everything else, you know, they've got all their cookies, now they're going after the crumbs kind of thing, number one. And number two, we have, you mentioned, this has been going on for a whole generation, and the consequential generation, the generation that's been on the receiving end of Reaganomics, essentially, and I think we should call that out, because that's really where, in my opinion, that's where a lot of this began. I get it, Jimmy Carter, you know, the last 2 years he was deregulating things, he was starting to drink the Kool-Aid, but really this was Reaganomics. Is the millennials. The millennials are totally whacked. I mean, you know, they're in debt. They're postponing having kids. They're postponing getting married. They're postponing buying houses, and a lot of them are sitting around going, "Oh, the boomers did this to us." It wasn't the boomers. It was the billionaires. Your thoughts?
Absolutely, and you know, I wonder, and I worry to myself as an American, we are now becoming an outlier, not only in inequality, but in the predictable consequences of inequality. For example, creating one obstacle after another for our young people to get the skill and the training that college and universities and graduate programs produce. You know, the colleges and universities are where you create the quality and the quantity of skilled labor. And every economist I know of all persuasions is convinced that the future of the American economy in a world system requires us to have good quality and good quantity of trained people. But we now put that whole generation into debt if they're going to get this degree. We are now in this new tax bill about to make graduate students pay taxes on money they don't even see, the tuition waiver position of the House on this subject. What is it? We're crazy. The Germans and the Finns, for example, in Europe, have gone the opposite direction to make tuition at all schools zero in order not to indebt their young people.
Plus, they give the students a stipend.
Yep. It's an incredible spectacle of spinning out of control that I think we're all observers of as we watch this bill go through.
Yeah, I think that's so true. In those countries, in Germany and Finland, and many other countries, they'll actually pay students a small stipend to go to college, you know, for their housing and their books and things.
Absolutely.
So
and they understand the social benefits and the economic benefits of doing this as being, in the end, good for everybody, including the well-off people. And so they're not into quite the level of evil kind of redistribution of wealth from the bottom and the middle to the top, because they see in the long run, this is literally self-defeating.
Yeah, amen. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for being with us, Richard. Great having you with us today.